In the last week, more than 800 suspected criminals were arrested after basically being tricked into using a communications app that they didn't realise was under the control of law enforcement around the world. Exactly how did that happen and what are the ramifications of it? We have Ariel Bogle from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and the co-founder of the Daily Oz, Sam Koslowski. Sam, just take me back to the beginning. This app, where did it come from?
So the app was called ANOM, and it took a few days for the true description of the app to kind of make itself known in the media. It turns out it actually was a handset that you had to buy that was stripped of all other mobile technologies except for this app. And it was a way for organised crims to communicate around the world on what they believed to be a totally off-grid platform. One of the interesting observations that a lot of the law enforcement bodies made during the week was that they could actually watch the criminals screw each other over. And they were surprised with how much backstabbing there was in the app itself.
You could clock with an egg timer how long it's going to take somebody to make a 12-part podcast out of this.
And a Netflix series.
And a Netflix series and 14 books. Ariel, let's just start with how they managed to get these criminals, well, alleged criminals, let's say, to download this app in the first place. Like, where did that idea even come from?
So when we first heard about it in Australia, the federal police did a big press conference and they said the idea for this operation and the app had been hatched over a couple of beers. But once the FBI released its documents in the US, we started to get a bit more of a nuanced picture of how it had all rolled out. So in fact, they hadn't built this app from scratch. It turned out there was somebody in the United States, a criminal of some sort, I think in California, who had started building the ANOM platform himself. And then when he was in touch with the FBI for some reason, he offered them the technology in exchange for something like a less than prison sentence or something like this. And so from there, the FBI started developing the platform in conjunction with the AFP and other police forces and started running it. But what's interesting, I think, it's not just that they built the technology and that they had this master key on each message to decrypt it and store it, which is what's allowed this like quite insane eagle-eyed picture of international crime, but also that they had this network of distribution. So they were able to sort of seed the app and the phone into various criminal networks and the criminals started essentially recommending it to each other, including quite a high-profile Australian Turkish man who's now considered to be one of the key figures pushing out this device. And he's been invited, I think, to turn himself in for fear of what might happen to him out there, given his pretty instrumental role in ensuring all these people were using essentially a backdoored platform.
So as a piece of technology itself, is there something, Sam, that makes it stand out from other forms of, I want to say, surveillance technology, for lack of a better term?
As far as I understand, no. It's more about the distribution of the technology that made this special. What's different about this one is just how quickly it was adopted by organised crims. There were 25 million messages intercepted over 3 years in 45 languages. So they got a lot more than they bargained for. And I think that is why they shut down the app at a time of their choosing, is because the workload was just getting so massive that they couldn't handle how many messages were coming through.
The data and the information collected from this app, is it legally permissible in all the different territories where they've arrested people?
Well, that will be the test. We'll have to wait and see whether the courts consider this kind of information culled from this app to be admissible in court. So in Australia, the AFP indicated that they did rely on a pretty controversial at the time set of laws, the encryption laws for short, or the Assistance and Access, the TOLA Act that was passed a few years ago. And they haven't been clear yet about what provision of that act they relied on. They say that won't be revealed until it's sort of disclosed in open court. So it could be some of those tools, I suppose, the law gave police to request assistance from a technology company to decrypt technology in some way. More likely it's a computer access warrant, which was also part of the set of laws. But it seems quite a complicated picture in the United States as well. Generally, it seems like the United States, the FBI, were not able to decrypt or access the messages themselves. The Australian federal police were doing that on our side, sending sort of general information back to the US. And also a mysterious third country was involved who were also decrypting and storing the messages and sending back thrice weekly bulletins to the US. And under what kind of legal provision that was occurring also remains somewhat of a mystery. But there are a lot of people, obviously, for many reasons, have a lot of questions about the legal provisions relied upon because, it's pretty unusual for a police force to be running technology that criminals are using themselves, although not entirely unprecedented. We've kind of seen similar actions take place on dark web websites where cops end up running a dark web marketplace. But once again, there's a lot of questions here about, laws, entrapment, all kinds of things, and I guess we'll see that play out.
Also, you just found the one email newsletter I actually want to get as opposed to all the other ones that I ignore. The one telling me what all the international crims are doing from the mysterious third-party country that we don't know.
Those open rates on those emails would be massively high.
So, Sam, you've spoken to members of the FBI. Talk me through what it is you've learned and what was the most interesting thing you gleaned out of that.
So I had the opportunity to speak to the legal attaché for the FBI in Australia, Anthony Russo, last week. And the legal attaché is basically the FBI's representative on the ground. And that itself is interesting. The fact that the FBI has a presence in Australia is fascinating. So he leads quite a big team out of Canberra. And the most challenging question I asked him was, is there really a need for encrypted apps anymore if the idea of encryption is now somewhat redundant? We're not sure if now WhatsApp is being intercepted by law enforcement. And he gave a very American response, which was that that's a discussion that we need to have with our elected representatives, and the trade-off between safety and security and privacy is one that we're going to have to grapple with now forever.
That is a very diplomatic answer.
Very diplomatic answer.
I'd also question, what do you mean by encryption being redundant? Because encryption was sort of functioning with this app. It was just there was a master key to decrypt that the police held. Similarly, WhatsApp remains encrypted. Just curious how he played that out.
Well, I guess if there's a built-in backdoor or there's another set of eyes on it, encryption will only get you so far, Sam, right?
Encryption is only as good as the number of people that can read the message. Yeah. So that was really interesting to hear from him. The other interesting discussion that we had was I asked him whether this was just going to be now a case of whack-a-mole, whether all the crims were going to go to another app and, take their business elsewhere. And he was very convinced that this was an historic moment for organised crime busting in the world.
Well, I mean, there's a tendency to roll one's eye at that, but the sheer scale of this, Ariel, would suggest that it is a pretty significant moment, certainly in international crime and sort of international partnerships. Tell me if I'm sucking down the Kool-Aid too much, Ariel.
No, I think everybody agrees it's pretty extraordinary in its scale. The number of devices out there that were being used, the number of messages that were being intercepted, even the number of arrests that have been made off the back of data gleaned from this product. I mean, it is extraordinary. And it does point to a bigger picture in criminal communications. I will caveat that it's not something I'm expert in, but in general, there have been other platforms that have attempted something similar to ANOM, but without the being backdoored by the FBI bit. There was Phantom Secure, encrypt. They keep getting shut down by law enforcement. And now you have a wildly popular platform having been run essentially by law enforcement. So if I was running some kind of illegal operation, I would be pretty unsure where to turn. I mean, these criminals do seem unwilling, or they would prefer to use something off the shelf, something custom built for their purposes, rather than using, say, an iPhone with Signal. But you do wonder at this point whether iPhone with a Signal app would have been far more secure than ANOM.
I feel like it's just a matter of time before somebody in Signal's PR team tries to seed that story and then realizes it's a terrible idea. All right, there is lots more of this in the podcast of Download This Show. You can get it right now.